What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rumor Roundup. My name is Rob, and we have a huge episode for you guys today. The big thing that everybody is talking about right now. Supposedly, by his own admission, James Gunn has had conversations with the head of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Kevin Feige, and the head of what passes for a cinematic universe at DC, with having a crossover between both universes. That's right, the Marvel Cinematic Universe meets whatever we call the DC movies right now. That's an awesome idea. I love the idea of these things crossing over. One, because it's great publicity for the MCU, and two, because it could save the DC Cinematic Universe. So I love the idea of these two things meeting. Having said that, no idea how that would happen. Honestly, it only ever happened a couple times. The first time it was Marvel versus DC, and it basically had to do with these two brothers who essentially forced the universes to meet with each other. After that, there was this weird reality warper named Access, and honestly, the entire plot behind it's kind of ridiculous, so if they did it in movies, people would laugh at it, they would probably consider it to be DC's idea, and that would just sink their cinematic universe even further, while Kevin Feige was like, yes, that is Warner Brothers' idea. Blame them. So I have no idea what would go on there, but the reality is whenever we saw Marvel and DC cross over with each other, some relatively cool things came out of it. So the first time it happened, it was really a fan service kind of thing. And in fact, what they did is they had characters from Marvel fight characters from DC, and they had fans determine who the winner would be. And then all the writers did was just craft how the fight would go down. But seeing Wonder Woman face off against Storm, or seeing the Incredible Hulk fight Superman, these were cool things that we got a chance to see. Eventually you jump into later on, which was Justice League versus the Avengers, or JLA versus the Avengers. And that was kind of a cool concept. It really had to do with the schemings and machinations of stuff going on behind the scenes, but it was actually in that story that we learned the Infinity Gauntlet doesn't work in alternate realities. Following that, Marvel took it and ran with it, and just kind of became an absolute rule in the Marvel universe that the Infinity Gauntlet only works in its native universe. But seeing these cinematic universes meet would pose some pretty cool stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really just hearsay, right? There's no factual evidence of this aside from what James Gunn told us. And it could have been that this casual conversation he had with them was him walking into the office and saying, hey, how would you feel about crossing over with DC? Or hey, how would you feel about crossing over with Marvel as far as the movies go? And their answer is like, no. And like, that's the conversation. We don't really know, right? We have no evidence on this. But moving on to our next topic, Jameela Jamil has been cast as Titania in the She-Hulk TV show. It is awesome to see Titania getting some representation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't really believe anything major will come out of it, and if anything, they'll probably kill her character off. But if they really wanted to pursue its course, you could potentially make an argument that Secret Wars is coming or may have already happened or something like that. The reason why I say that is Titania debuted during the Secret Wars event. And the way this worked is Titania was basically a girl who was kind of diminutive in size and always longed to be what amounted to essentially an Amazon. And so eventually she got her wish during the Secret Wars event when she was beefed up, she was huge, and she was just kind of this colossus of a woman. She was in a lot of ways an Amazon, at least only in terms of physical appearance. Eventually she dated Crusher Creel for a while. They were knocking boots for quite some time. They were kind of on again, off again. But Titania is a big woman, and she really is one of the very few mainstay foes that She-Hulk has. In reality, I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go down, which really kind of allows us to sort of sidecar our next topic, which is Skaar, the son of Hulk, appearing in She-Hulk. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about these things. And the reason why is because the She-Hulk TV show has been billed as a half-hour-long legal comedy. Anybody who's ever read anything about Titania, or especially Skaar, son of Hulk, will tell you they're about as far from comedic characters as you can get. Here's the thing about Skaar, son of Hulk, right? Skaar is basically the Incredible Hulk without the limitless power, but the ability to control the old power, which basically means he can control the earth, right? Like literally tectonic plates, things like that. What this does is it makes Skaar a pretty significant character, but more so than that, in terms of just how his character functioned, he didn't have a funny bone in his body. He was a dick. He was just kind of mean, like all the time. But by and large, he was just kind of like one of these characters who wanted to prove that he was better than the Incredible Hulk, just kind of had a chip on his shoulder all the time. But you can tell from this bit of a description here that there isn't really a whole lot in terms of comedy there. And the reality is, I don't know how I feel about Titania or Skaar, son of Hulk being depicted in a comedy show, because I don't really believe that we're going to see them in a serious tone. And I don't really know if we're going to see anything with regards to like Jennifer Walters doing her thing where she's going through all the legal stuff in a courtroom and then, oh my God, the son of the Incredible Hulk is attacking the earth. Let's go do that. And like it deviates for a whole episode like this super serious tone. I imagine Skaar and Titania will kind of be brought in and they'll be a part of that sort of legal comedy that we see going on in terms of the feel of the show. And I don't know how I feel about that. I kind of prefer something a little more serious with them. I would prefer to see characters like that when they're actually heavy hitters, when they sort of reflect their comic book counterparts. Now, it could be that it's a resounding success, and that's why I'm not really advocating that it's gonna be a disaster, that it's stupid, it's a silly idea, because truth to tell, I never really would have believed that Wanda could have held her own TV show, and WandaVision was fantastic. So it really just kind of takes a little bit of experimentation, and it takes a little bit of just kind of putting characters in situations you wouldn't normally see them in to actually make them a little more interesting than they were when they initially appeared. Most people don't care about Titania, and most of you guys have probably never heard of her, but for what you do see, she's not that interesting. But if you put her in the show and they make her fantastic, things could really get cool from there. So I guess it's really only a matter of time, and we just kind of have to wait to see what happens. But on to our next topic, Grant Gustin's Flash is actually gonna have a cameo in the Flash film. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I always felt like Grant Gustin would have made a great addition to the actual DC Cinematic Universe film line. I never liked the idea that they cast Ezra Miller, one, because he runs weird, and two, while there is a lot of comedy to his character, if I'm being honest, I feel like Grant Gustin nails Barry Allen almost perfectly. The writing of the show really needs some work. But as far as like the actual portrayal of the characters, Candice Patton does an amazing job as Iris West, and Grant Gustin does an amazing job as Barry Allen. And I always felt like having him in the show was a little bit of like a training wheels kind of thing, right? Let's see how Grant Gustin performs as the Flash on CW, and then if he does well, let's put him in the movies. And I felt like that's exactly what should have happened. A lot of that universe was already built. I'm not really sure I would bring anybody else along for the ride, maybe Harrison Wells, but that might be about it. The rest of the cast, I could kind of do without. They're not bad, it's just they don't really seem essential. And so because of that, I would have just made Grant Gustin the main Flash in the movie. Such as it was, we ended up getting Ezra Miller. One thing I am glad to see, we are getting some Grant Gustin representation in the movies. In what capacity, we're not entirely sure. It's told that we're getting a cameo, which means if that's the case, it might be for a minute or two. Or it could be one of these things that because it deals with the idea of the Flashpoint paradox, that it might be just some alternate reality depiction that we saw. I mean, we did see in the Crisis on Infinite Earths television event that Ezra Miller crossed over with Barry Allen in the CW with Grant Gustin. So it makes sense they would kind of do the opposite, and it may very well be that it's just kind of a scene that leads into that scene, and that's really it, right? It just kind of gives us how we got to that point when Ezra Miller's in the Speed Force and he talks to Grant Gustin and then just disappears, and that's basically it. But I don't know. I mean, the biggest issue that I feel like the CW has, or really even just Warner Brothers has, is their entire cinematic universe feels so disheveled. And so because of that, I feel like just kind of wiping away all that stuff, right? Using Flashpoint paradox to kind of clear the landscape, say, okay, we're basically starting over here, and then making Grant Gustin the main Flash, getting rid of Ezra Miller, I think is a great idea. But again, maybe I'm in the minority here, right? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, but maybe I'm in the minority. Maybe I'm one of the few people who thinks that Grant Gustin would be a great Flash, at least as far as the movies go. I know that this is a little bit of a tangent about Grant Gustin, it's just I'm a huge fan. Let's move on to our next topic before I derail this entire video and go off on tangents about stuff that have nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. So Chameleon is rumored or expected to be a villain in the Kraven the Hunter solo film. Now here's the thing, I've been doing a lot of reading online, and a lot of people are kind of looking at this like, oh my God, Sony, really a Kraven film? I think Sony's doing something spectacular here, and I think Sony's doing what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has failed at. Here's one of the most important things to understand if you've read comics for any real measure of time. Oftentimes, the villains are more interesting than the heroes. Spider-Man is okay, but whenever I read Peter Parker, there's only really two big runs that I like about his character. The first one is Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run, and the second one is actually in Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run, which is when Dr. Octopus takes over the body of Peter Parker and you get Superior Spider-Man. Whenever I look at this idea of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and I look at the villains, right? Thanos and the Red Skull and all this kind of stuff, even characters like Dormammu, who we'll probably see a little bit more of, Baron Mordo, who basically just vanished. We know he's gonna be in Doctor Strange 2, but I look at these villains that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has and they kill them off, and it feels like such a waste. If you look at characters like William Stryker, for example, in Marvel Comics, he's a religious evangelical fundamentalist who believes it's his mission from God to kill mutants. So he created the Purifiers. He has no powers whatsoever, but he is exceedingly charismatic, and that's what makes him so intriguing. Magneto speaks for himself, but you see this kind of stuff all the time, and I feel like Sony launching villain-based films, movies that focus on the stories of the villains is great. It's a great idea. Kraven the Hunter, can be cool sometimes. I guess it really depends on what particular story that you're reading. If you do read the story where he basically eats a whole bunch of spiders to try to give himself Spider-Man's powers because he's crazy, it's a little wonky. But if you read Kraven the Hunter stories that are akin to like the Most Dangerous Game, right? The idea of the hunter hunting people, then you can get some really, really cool stories out of it. You can get a lot of depth to his character. The idea of the chameleon appearing is cool because a chameleon can just become anybody, right? A master of disguise. A lot of these villains that are being built up, I feel like are gonna play a much bigger role as far as what Sony wants to do with Spider-Man, but I think it's a genius idea, so I don't really have any hate for it. Having said that, Chameleon has long since deserved a role as far as movies go. He was the first villain Peter Parker ever fought, so I'm kind of surprised that we haven't really seen a chameleon-centric film up to this point. I mean, a lot of people might say, well, I mean, you know, it's Chameleon, right? How could you possibly make him interesting? People said the same thing about Iron Man, and look at where we are as far as the Iron Man films go, so you can't really write him off. At the end of the day, it all comes down to how the character is written, so I am excited to see the Chameleon might appear in Kraven. I would much rather see a solo Chameleon film, depending on how it's done, but at the end of the day, it is a cool thing that we're getting there, so I can't be too upset about it. So our next little bit of news here, and not a whole lot to talk about here, Aquaman 2 is officially titled Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. It may be that it ties into a lot of the DC Rebirth stuff, so it kind of gives us like the kings of old and all that kind of stuff. But the first Aquaman film was a little too fast and the furious for me in terms of how it was shot and how it felt. Having said that, it was still good, right? I don't want to be one of these guys who's just like, everything sucked. It was still a pretty good movie. It was certainly one of the best films that DC had released in a long, long time. But I am excited to see what this does turn into. One of the funny things about Aquaman, there's a lot of history and a lot of mythos there, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on with the character. So if they tell it right, they can really give us a lot of the old stories with regards to like Aquaman, Arthur Curry, and a lot of the history that goes in there and all that kind of stuff. So I'm down, right? At the very least, it's kind of cool to see that it got a name, but you know, I don't really know what significance that has on the nature of the story, right? Maybe just one of those lost kingdoms that exist out there that are not officially part of Atlantis, but they just kind of exist out there as kind of a side along to Atlantis and sort of do their own thing. Again, we're not entirely sure here. But another cool little thing that we saw, we got to see Kamala Khan using her powers on set. Well, I mean, when I say using her powers, really more of her just moving like she will use her powers. She's just pushing, right? There's not really a whole lot going on there. It's really just kind of like the set pieces, but it is kind of cool. Kamala Khan is one of these characters where I'm interested to see what they do with her, because there really is no middle ground when it comes to Kamala Khan. Either you love her or you hate her. And a lot of that is predicated on your ability to identify with her, that given the nature of her religion, that is very much rooted in tradition, family values. But when you're living in the States, family values kind of exist sometimes in movies, but we're not nearly as family oriented as a lot of people in the Middle East. And so when you have that traditional culture clashing with a lot of the progressive cultural ideas that exist here in the States, especially when you're a teenager trying to fit in, that can resonate a lot with a lot of younger kids. But I imagine it can only really resonate strongly if you can identify with her character. Having said that, I'm not calling her a lost cause. One of the best decisions that Marvel ever made was putting her on the Champions, which were basically the Young Avengers, but by like a different name. But it was still a cool concept, seeing her team up with Sam Alexander Nova and Miles Morales Spider-Man. I don't know if any of that stuff's really gonna happen, but the point that I'm making here is your ability to enjoy Kamala Khan is not really relegated to whether or not you can identify with her being a Muslim Pakistani American trying to fit into American culture while respecting her roots as far as being a Muslim from Pakistan. I'm sure they'll make a lot of cool jokes and they'll be like the young angsty teenager vibe, and so there'll be a lot of cool moments in there that I'm sure that you'll enjoy. But I think to really grasp the character, you kind of have to really be able to understand where she's coming from. But you know, at the end of the day, I'm excited to see it. I love watching like teenage superheroes because there's just so much youth and vibrance that's thrown in there. Plus, they're funny, right? Like Sam Alexander as Nova is hilarious. He's a lot cooler than Richard Rider was. Richard Rider was boring as hell. I know, I read him for 20 years. But moving on to our next topic, and this is probably one of the most significant things that we've heard of recently, which actually came out maybe about 20 hours ago, about yesterday. As far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe What If series, and again, this is just a bit of a rumor here, Erik Killmonger and Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man are supposed to team up. What an odd couple, but how awesome would that be? I loved the character of Erik Killmonger. I loved him in the movies. The only thing I didn't like about his appearance in the movies is that in the comics, he defeated Black Panther even when Black Panther had his powers. And that was designed to be a testament to how capable Erik Killmonger was. I kind of wish they'd carry that over to the movies, that Erik Killmonger defeated T'Challa even when T'Challa had his powers. But I think they kind of had to nix that out so they could basically have the two of them fight on a more even keel when they both had the heart-shaped herb at the end of the film. But regardless of the circumstance, I loved it, right? I loved Erik Killmonger. Michael B. Jordan is probably one of my top 3 favorite actors throughout all of Hollywood. I've been following him since The Wire, for those of you guys who remember how long he's been acting. But to see him and Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man team up in the What If series, which may or may not be voiced by Robert Downey Jr., sounds awesome, man, because those are 2 characters who never met, and I kind of always wanted them to. There wouldn't really be a reason for them to. There wouldn't really be a reason for, like, you know, Iron Man to show up in Wakanda and face off against Erik Killmonger alongside Black Panther. That'd be something that you'd see if Erik Killmonger had survived Black Panther 1 and then became maybe a more formidable villain or appeared in like a different film or something like that. If we saw something akin to like Acts of Vengeance, where Loki gathered together all these different villains and then had them face off against all the heroes, but switched around who was facing off against who. So like Red Skull would fight Hawkeye and like Erik Killmonger would fight Iron Man, and then maybe something else would go on. Crossbones might fight Black Panther, I don't really know. But at the end of the day, kind of switching them around, that would have been a cool thing to see. But even if we're only gonna see it in the form of an animated series, I'm excited for it, man. These 2 guys meeting, I can't be the only one, right? I can't be the only one who's excited at the idea of Erik Killmonger encountering Iron Man, right? I'm sure you guys are hyped for that too. But having said that, guys, this wraps up our episode of the Rumor Roundup. Let us know in the comments if there's any important news bits that you think we missed, and we'll include those in next week's video, and I will catch you all later. Peace.